What's the word, everybody? We are back again for the By the Horns podcast. Cam Smith alongside my man, Drew Stevens, and we are presented by Toyota. Remember that Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand, so find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. Speaking of going places, Drew, we got some places to go because the last time we tapped in with everybody, it was just after the season opener for this Bulls team against the Pelicans. Didn't go the way that they wanted to. I kind of assumed that this team could have been in a great position to win that ball game, but it was a lot going on. I mean, turnovers, yeah, they were playing with that fast pace, but we were looking at a team that was not used to playing a fast pace, but also taking care of the basketball, and that resulted in 21 turnovers, and the Pelicans scored 30 points off of it. But you spin it forward to Friday night, and in Milwaukee against one of the favorites, not only to win the Eastern Conference, but then also maybe get to the NBA championship and win it all, the Milwaukee Bucks, like Giannis Antetokounmpo, Damian Lillard. We know last year for those guys didn't work out too well, and they were coming back this season with a vengeance, right? Obviously, with the Bucks still dealing with Chris Middleton being out because he's recovering from the ankle surgeries that he had in the offseason. So the Bucks were not at full strength. But we know what it is, Drew. In the NBA, it don't matter if you're full strength or if you're not at full strength. You got to go out there and hoop and play games. So What we're going to do for everybody and all of our listeners, we're going to unpack the past three games for the Chicago Bulls, going back to last Friday in Milwaukee, to the home opener against Oklahoma City Thunder, and welcoming back Alex Caruso, who's now a member of the Thunder after being traded to OKC for Josh Giddey straight up. And then in Memphis, Drew, some interesting things happen in Memphis, and we will get there. We will get there, but first, we got to start it off against the Milwaukee Bucks, man.
Yeah, man. We had talked about that possibly being a game maybe they could sneak out a win from, just given the lack of point of attack defense that Milwaukee has, and the Bulls' style of play this season, the way they want to attack, and lo and behold, man, the formula is the formula. Like, shoot a lot of threes, hopefully get a good clip of them going in, keep the turnovers low, and against a team like the Milwaukee Bucks, who aren't going to necessarily pressure the ball as much as some of the other teams. Like, we'll get to the Thunder later on in this pod, man. They took advantage of it. They took full advantage of it. Surprised, I think, a lot of people with that formula that they played with, and were able to do it without Lonzo on the court, who's been pretty good in limited minutes that he's gotten so far this season.
Yeah, and you look at Lonzo, obviously he wasn't going to play back-to-backs. He said during media day that he was ruling that out, and it just made sense for Lonzo not to play against the Milwaukee Bucks Friday night because the Bulls were going to be on a back-to-back. So I mentioned they had the Thunder coming in for the home opener, so it wouldn't be smart to play Lonzo Friday night in Milwaukee and then not give home fans Lonzo on that court in the United Center. So, you see how that works out for this team. But going back to that Milwaukee game, man, one thing that I've seen from this Bulls team, and something that we've heard from them and Billy Donovan, is just about being competitive and fighting. And I think when people heard from Donovan during the offseason, and more so during media day, and also from some of the players about the up-tempo play and the fast pace and a lot of threes, people were thinking, okay, well, how are you going to compete? How are you going to be competitive? But that's been the opposite of this team, man. You look back to the first game against the Pelicans. Yeah, I understand. Zion was out. You had Brandon Ingram really being that main option for the Pelicans. DeJounte Murray still exists and even almost messed around and got a triple-double. He eventually, unfortunately for him, fractured his hand and had surgery on that. So we're wishing him a speedy recovery, but he should be back in a few weeks. And you thought that with Zion out, the Bulls' chances of getting that win, especially trying to shock the Pelicans in their season home opener, you thought that, okay, maybe this could happen. But it didn't happen that way. And there were certain areas, especially in that third quarter, where it was just a lack of urgency, a lack of competitiveness, and let's just be real, a lack of hooping. But what happened Friday night and the film session that I'm sure that happened between Billy Donovan and the players and holding guys accountable, it was a different Bulls team. They were fighting for loose balls. They were fighting on the offensive glass, getting back in transition, really attacking a Bucks defense that doesn't really play defense. Let's just call a spade a spade. I mean, the Milwaukee Bucks don't do that very well.
This is a different team, man, ever since they made that trade for Dame and Drew Holiday being gone. Just a different squad over there.
Yeah, and you see how that resulted in the situations for the Bucks and the Celtics. One is an NBA champion and just raised their 18th banner last week in Celtics franchise history. And another was bounced out of the first round once again. So that's another story for another day. But, I mean, to your point, when you trade defense for offense, those are the results you're going to get, right? I mean, a team that is kind of like Olay, they're going to let you go by them and try and outscore you to get wins. But the Bulls understood that, right? And one thing that they really cleaned up in the difference from the Pelicans game to the Bucks game was the 21 turnovers in the Pelicans game. And then you go right back another road game and face off against Milwaukee. And you only have, I'm going to count them for 9. I know it was officially 10, but that last turnover was, I ain't going to say garbage time, but it was towards the end of the game. I'm not going to disrespect anybody because I would feel disrespected if I was in there and people would call it garbage time. But I would give them 9 turnovers in that game. So they took better care of the basketball. But that's something that you should do against a defense, again, that doesn't play defense, is not going to defend you. But then also, 2, doesn't turn you over and doesn't force opponent turnovers. And that's really been the MO of the Milwaukee Bucks the past few seasons. I looked at the numbers. Do yourself a favor and look up the numbers if you don't believe me, because it's right there smack in the middle of your face if they do not force opponent turnovers. So the Bulls came into that game understanding that, okay, we can be aggressive. We can shoot our threes and try and knock down shots. And speaking of shooting threes, Kobe White had himself a game, Drew. The boy was shooting the leather off the ball. The Kobe White that we were seeing in New Orleans, because he went 0 for 5, but then just flipped his entire game against Milwaukee and showed up and showed out.
It reminded me of the performance he put on in that first playing game last season against the Hawks. Now those stats unfortunately don't count.
And also NBA and me and Drew Stevens' books, we're counting that game. Those stats count. Now don't play Kobe White. Don't play him like that. Those stats count.
Right, you got to give him something, man. You got to give him something like a nice little parting gift for being in the play-in, but not being able to get into the actual postseason play. But no, it reminds me of that game, man.
At least give him a Kobe White day on NBA TV or something. Something. Come on, Kobe White's moments, the best games.
No, I'm with it, man. He was great that game. Zach as well, but Kobe kind of took over just the way that he was scoring the ball. I think he was like the 3rd or 4th player ever to have certain measurables in terms of points, rebounds, assists, steals, and 3-pointers made. So, I mean, he made history that night, literally. And this time it actually went into the record books. And I think one feeds the other, right? When you're on the court and you're making shots and the offense is flowing, you know that if you're open, if you cut, if you move without the basketball, guys are going to find you. I think that gives you a little more oomph on the defensive side of the ball, because you know it's just not you playing one side and just kind of doing cardio on the other. So it was a great team win for them. Again, they surprised, I think, a lot of people. I was surprised, even though we had talked about them maybe being able to take advantage of a Milwaukee team that maybe was lacking a little bit, not having Chris Middleton out there. Their defense obviously being what it is, and them just kind of trying to find a new identity for themselves, as strangely as that might sound, given that they have, a kind of perennial all NBA MVP candidate in Giannis Antetokounmpo. But yeah, man, that was the blueprint right there. And unfortunately, we've seen it kind of go a not so great game, not so great game, great game. And I think that's kind of how this season is going to play out. Not necessarily every other game like that, but shots are not always going to fall with the style of play that they want to put into practice this season. Decision making is not always going to be there. Teams are going to force you to make decisions that you don't want to make, or affect the chemistry you have on the court together. So, if this team is going to compete night in and night out, they're going to have to hope for a little shooting luck, but then also, they've got to be active defensively. And one of the big things that I'm taking away from on the defensive side of the ball is they look lost a lot out there. Now, it's not every possession. We'll get into that bench group that came in and helped kind of save the day against Memphis tonight. But the rotations especially are just kind of slow, a step behind. Guys are getting back cut, kind of miscommunication on the backside. So there's definitely things to clean up. But again, like if they can just remain active on that side of the ball, they can help themselves out a lot.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. And defensive transition has been an issue for this Bulls team, especially trying to stop the basketball. I mean, it's one thing when Giannis has the ball, of course, it's difficult to stop him. And y'all know I call him the Terminator just because he just does not stop playing. Like he just keeps moving forward. So there were moments where the Bulls would try to stay in front. But to your point of Giannis being another one of those guys that will be in the MVP conversation every single year, really for the past, 5 years, Drew? Mm-hmm. Let's be honest on that with Giannis. And we take him for granted just because he just does great things on a night in, night out basis that you're like, okay, Giannis had another like 38, 15 rebounds, 7 assists, 3 block game. Like, I mean, it's cool, but what else he's going to do? Right. It's like, no, it's great. It's cool. But my point is that you have a guy that downhill is not going to stop. And so one for the Bulls to try and get in front of that, you're risking your health in that, but then also two, with other guys like a Damian Lillard or even like a Pat Connaughton that we saw sometimes in transition, get the basketball and go. And just other players from the Milwaukee Bucks getting downhill in transition. You have to, one, recognize and stop that basketball. And I think that's one of the bigger pet peeves for coaches, no matter what level it is, but especially in the NBA, because guys are so talented and so athletic. And when they get downhill and they get in transition and you have kickouts for threes or dunks, that just ignites not only the team, but also the crowd, especially if you're on the road. So those issues have to be corrected with this Bulls team. But this is where it gets interesting because we talked about the Bulls in half-court defense and lack of defense in transition. And I know, look, stats and numbers do not tell the entire story.
But they help. They help paint a picture. But me and Drew have watched these games. Drew, we were going to get to the home opener last Saturday night against the Oklahoma City Thunder. Yeah.
This team can look lost. But if you let the stats tell it, this is a top 10 team in defensive rating. So again, the numbers say one thing, but there are other issues when you look at this team as a whole. You're like, okay, they have a lot to clean up. But if you're just gonna go by the stats, and we don't do that on By the Horns. We watch these games because we're journalists, we're reporters, we follow this Bulls team, right? I mean, we're on the beat. You have to be there to see certain things with this group, but it does kind of give you a pause to see that they're top 10 in defensive rating. So let's get into one of the reasons why you see them during the ball game, and more specifically the home opener, and you're like, Cam, this team was top 10 in defensive rating, because the ups and downs of the NBA season, which is going to be for everyone. It doesn't matter who it is, right? So as we record this podcast, Drew, and I threw a little screenshot out of the top 6 teams in the Eastern Conference right now. And again, it's going to be a long season, but also just looking at this, the Cleveland Cavaliers, as of right now, tonight, Monday night, that the Cleveland Cavaliers are 4-0, Boston Celtics 4-0, 2 of the top teams in the East, followed by the Orlando Magic, the Miami Heat at the 4th spot, the Chicago Bulls at the 5th spot, and the Atlanta Hawks at the 6th spot. So both of those teams, Chicago and Atlanta, tied in terms of record when it comes to being 500. So that just gives you a small, very small, very, very small sample size, 4 games in, of how you take things. Now, of course, we need a bigger sample size, 20 to 25 games, to really get an idea of who's going to be who, identity-wise, what it looks like in the standings. But it just lets you know that things can change sometimes on a nightly basis on how a team plays. And that's what it's been for the Bulls through 4 games so far. We saw what happened against the Pelicans to start the season. They flipped the script against the Bucks in Milwaukee for their home opener and put up right now a season-high points in 133. And then the home opener at the United Center happened, Drew. And you have a lot going on with that. You have, one, Alex Caruso coming back to the United Center, one of the beloved players for the Bulls in his time in that uniform, a guy that won last year's NBA Hustle Award as a member of the Chicago Bulls, and really one of those leaders that the Bulls leaned on, especially on the defensive end, to help them get out of situations. I mean, how many times did we see Alex Caruso last year where it looked like it was just 5 Alex Carusos out there because he was all over the place? He would challenge a shot, go run in and try and get the defensive rebound. If it got popped out, he's rotating to the next pass out. If that pass goes out, he might deflect it, knock it out of bounds. It was just like Caruso is everywhere. So you understand, for a city like Chicago that prides itself on work ethic, on doing the dirty stuff, gritty stuff to get things done, you're like, man, Caruso for sure is always good in the city of Chicago. So you have that element. You have the element of the home opener for the Bulls coming off Friday night's Bucks win. So fans are like, oh, we get to see this team that put up 133 points against a Milwaukee team that could possibly win the NBA championship. This team that hit 21 threes on the road in Milwaukee, and they're still probably riding that same high coming into the home opener. Bet we got to watch this team. And you throw in the fact that Josh Giddey is going up against his former teammates and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Williams, and everybody on that Thunder squad that he's played with for the past couple of years. So a lot of elements involved into that ball game. But Drew, we were sitting right next to each other, press row at the United Center. And the storylines didn't match up, man. It was really just a lackluster game because both teams shot really poorly from the field.
They really did. It was just kind of a listless home opener for everything you just said, for all the storylines that were going into the game, for the way that they played against Milwaukee. It was a letdown. It was a real letdown. Like you said, both teams really struggled to shoot the ball. Yeah. And honestly, the Bulls, had they shot the ball better, been a little more cautious with the ball and their decision making, they could have stolen that game as well, just because of the way that OKC was playing. They weren't hitting from the arc. They weren't pulling away at first, but they really just shot themselves in the foot. Zach LaVine said as much. We saw him commit another 7 turnovers, the same way he did in the season opener against the Pelicans. Just a lot of unforced turnovers, and then hustle plays, guys kind of losing the ball and just kind of watching it roll and not really putting forth the effort to get after it. So that was a little strange to see. I understand that it's a back-to-back, but it's the third game of the season. So again, just a letdown in that sense. And again, guys kind of getting too maybe far ahead of their skis in that game, leaving their feet to pass the ball. Yeah. Losing the ball, just it's slipping out of guys' hands. It was a weird mix of things in that game. And
it was resulted in 26 turnovers for that Bulls team.
26 turnovers. Now I think, you don't want to call it garbage time, but before Billy actually kind of waved the white flag, I think they were at maybe 21, but still 21 turnovers. You're not going to win a lot of games like that, especially when you shoot the ball from 3 at a 28, 29% clip. That's losing basketball. It's not going to get it done. And it didn't that game. They were lucky to get out of there with just a 19-point loss. The Thunder, I think, had gone up by as much as 30 at one point, if I'm not mistaken. So what started as kind of a game that had some buzz because of Alex Caruso being back, Josh Giddey facing his old team, basketball being back in United Center after a long hiatus. It was just kind of a hollow game, man. I thought those guys would come out with a little more energy and be ready to rock.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Especially when you found out who the halftime performer was going to be, the legendary, the iconic Red Panda. Yes. It's like, how y'all gonna play like this? The Red Panda as the halftime performer. Why are we disrespecting the legend in Red Panda, who put on another one of the great Red Panda performances that you've seen? I've seen it time and time again, Drew, and I know I'm rerouting this conversation just because I gotta give love to Red Panda, but I've seen her at the United Center. Obviously, I've seen her at Madison Square Garden and a couple other arenas. And the product is still the same product, and that's greatness, man. So, shout out to Red Panda because she's been doing it for a number of years, and I just got to give my love to Red Panda on that one. But
I still want to know, how do you learn that you can do that? I don't know.
Right, but then also, who is she teaching her skill set and her ways to someone else, maybe somebody in the family, or does she have an apprentice that she's going to pass the game down to? Because it's not even just trying to flip the cups on top of your head. That's the final stage, obviously. Yeah. One, you got to be able to balance yourself on the unicycle, man. You have to be able to hold yourself together and make sure you get that going, because not only is she doing the flips with the bowls, but she's like spinning around and, presenting herself to the crowd is just a very true show woman in Red Panda doing those things. So I don't know who's next in line for Red Panda. I'm not sure if it's like, a
Like a
program or
family
like,
recipe or something.
right, exactly. Passing it down. But yeah, no, I think that was for sure after a lackluster halftime, or not halftime, excuse me, but first half for both of those teams. It was good to see Red Panda bring some energy back into the arena. But speaking of that first half, you talked about the Bulls having a great opportunity to try and steal that game. They really held Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in check. And we've had this conversation at the United Center about what happened last year with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, how he should have been, in my opinion, the NBA MVP. Again, I'm not trying to go nowhere else, but he was that dude last year. But the Bulls were really able to hold him in check in terms of not allowing him to be an impactful player and really taking over games. Because if you know SGA, that's all he does is just take over games, very methodical, but also just the change of pace and the speed burst that he has getting to the rim, and also how he's able to maneuver his body to not only finish, but draw fouls on defenders. But the Bulls did a really solid job in that first half of nullifying him. Now the third quarter happened and he woke up and it became SGA. And actually a little bit before the third quarter, just towards the later parts of the second quarter, he woke up a little bit. But you have those great opportunities to steal a win when you're nullifying a star or limiting them from what they do great. But again, it was the lack of hustle. It was the missed threes. It was just the urgency factor. That's something that is nothing new that we've talked about on this podcast before, because we saw it during the Pelicans game. And I'm sure with this group, you got to throw in and give them some grace that it was a back-to-back. So we're not discounting that factor. But also when you have those opportunities to really get after it and beat someone to the floor for a loose basketball or 50-50 basketball, you got to get out there and do it. They just didn't do it. They just didn't have the legs. And you can kind of tell after the game, those in the locker room, when we were speaking of those guys, there was a little fatigue right there because they're still getting used to playing this style of pace. And really the pace that they're playing, Drew, is number one in the NBA. No team plays a faster pace than the Chicago Bulls. So Billy Donovan and his coaching staff, they're holding true to what they've preached during training camp, through preseason, and through this early part of the season, is that, hey, we get the ball, we want to run, make or miss. We want to push in transition, shoot threes, because that's who we are. Our roster, our personnel is built on that. So let's take advantage of that. And they're definitely doing that in terms of pace of play, which could, again, we've seen the good in that when you think of the Milwaukee Bucks game and knocking down 21 threes and quick shots in transition. And we've seen the opposite of good. Yeah. And that is being careless with the basketball, turning it over. And that was the case again against the Oklahoma City Thunder with those 26 turnovers. So you have those situations for this team where it's going to be different night in, night out, but the consistency is what you want to find. And let's just be honest, Drew, you lose that game 114-95, you have a day's rest, you go back on the road against the Memphis Grizzlies. And this is another shot at NBA Commissioner Adam Silver. Why y'all do the Bulls like this? Why? What did the Bulls do to the NBA? 3 of the first 4 games, Drew, on the road against some really tough teams in New Orleans, Milwaukee, and then Memphis. But you look at what was going down right before the game is that Ja Morant, game time decision. He was dealing with the right thigh bruise. So he ends up not playing in that ball game. But still, even without Ja, you have Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., another one of those groups and teams that have a lot to prove that are coming into this season with a monster chip on the shoulder. But tell everybody, Drew, what you saw in Memphis.
So I think it started out, the Bulls, there was some urgency there. I know we're going to get into that shortly. It definitely was not missing or lacking the way it was in that home opener. But again, right. The defense just wasn't what it needed to be. Memphis was kind of getting a straight line drive to the basket. Guys were not staying in front of the wall.
I love that you said that, Drew. Patience. I love to say, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I love that you said the straight line drives, because that's something that I asked Billy Donovan specifically in the post game about the Bulls giving up 64 paint points. At that point of the season, it was the most paint points that they had given up. And Billy just said it straight up that you can't have guys having straight line drives to the rim, and spoke to Patrick Williams and Zach LaVine about that in the locker room post game. They were saying that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, as we mentioned, started to wake up in the second half, but he's the exception to that. But other guys should not have been able to have straight line drives like a Chet Holmgren, who was able to go coast to coast for a dunk right down the lane after getting the defensive rebound and pushing in transition. That's a footer. That's a 7-footer dribbling all the way down the court. You can't have that. So I think with Billy Donovan and this team, there again is another film session with this group where he's pointing and highlighting certain guys or situations where saying, we cannot have this happen, because the points in the paint conversation went from 44 against the Bucks in Milwaukee Friday to 64 against the Thunder at home in Chicago, and then to 70 against the Memphis Grizzlies in Memphis. So when I was seeing this, Drew, in the first half, I'm like, oh boy, are we're about to have a repeat of what we saw Saturday night for the home opener? But I had to jump in and throw those points in because it's very crucial for people to understand when you threw out straight line drives for ball handlers.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm glad you did. I think that's going to be something to keep an eye on every game, just because of the personnel that's out there, because the defensive breakdowns were particularly evident with that starting group, which we know there's not a lot of guys that are known for their defense in that starting five, to put it nicely. Luckily, Donovan went with a bench group that included Jalen Smith, Ayo Dosunmu, Dalen Terry, Julian Phillips, and I'm missing one guy. Help me out. Who am I missing?
Jalen Smith.
Jalen Smith? Okay, yeah. So yeah, that group of guys that got in there, and you tweeted it. You said the urgency movement after I tweeted out the youth movement. Like those guys, like they're younger. They're still trying to make their mark in the league. No disrespect to the vets on the team, but there's a certain oomph that they play with, and you can see it on the court. Like they're gonna make some mistakes just because they're younger guys out there, but like they fly around the court. They're trying to get after it, and they made plays. They made things happen. They brought this team back from I believe it was like a 20-point deficit at one point. And then the starters got back in there, and you saw them play with a little more oomph, a little more pop. Shots were falling. Josh Giddey, I have to give him props because I've gotten into some arguments with people. I shouldn't say arguments.
Who got Drew Stevens out here arguing in these social media streets, man? What y'all doing to my guy Drew?
Let me not say arguments, because I don't really argue like that. I got into conversations, little debates about Josh Giddey and his place on this team and the Bulls' future. And one of the things I talked about was just my concern about him and his ability to make winning plays. Tonight, he did that. He got deflections. He got steals. He came away with an extra possession down the stretch of that game, which led to a Kobe White three. The three that Zach hit that put them up for their first lead in the fourth quarter, he got a deflection and a steal that led to that bucket. So I'm going to give him his props, man. Josh Giddey played a good game, had a near triple-double tonight, but beyond the numbers, just the way that he was making plays out there, he was hustling, and that was something that, I just wanted to make sure that I highlighted here, because if you're going to have your questions about players and you may talk about what they didn't do on certain nights, like I think it's important that we also speak to what they are doing to possibly affect the game when they do that. So Josh Giddey, shout out to you. Big game for you tonight. Made things happen, man. Part of that starting group that came back in late in that game.
And how about the perimeter shooting from Josh Giddey? 2 of 4 from 3. I mean, he made some timely threes as well. So, and that's why I go back to this team when they understand that they have to be urgent every single night and that they can turn it on, and not saying that they can just turn it on and turn it off whenever they feel like it. They're not in a position to do that, but they need to keep that switch flipped on at all times, because when you look at this group and we talk about the lack of height with this team and how people will try to attack them just because defensively you think that you have certain advantages, but you have to make sure that you're bringing it every single night. And not to say that these guys don't believe that they don't know they have to bring it every single night. Not saying that, but there are moments where they start to get a little like a days ago, whether it's with the basketball or even with their defensive rotations, where you have late rotations, late closeouts, and guys knocking down threes like Desmond Bane, who turned into Steph Curry in Memphis. I don't know what the hell was going on. I'm like, okay, I know Desmond Bane can hoop, but I didn't know he could turn into Steph Curry because he was just knocking down step back threes to the right, to the left, catch and shoot threes. I'm like, wait a minute, what is happening right now? And this is going to be one of those games where you're like, man, we got to go and do a show and break this down. And it's not going to be pretty, but the Bulls saved us in that one because, again, that group of Jalen Smith, Patrick Williams, Ayo Dosunmu, Dalen Terry, and also Julian Phillips really showed up, and they were lively. And I need to find some type of nickname for that group. I don't know if I want to call them Junior Mafia. I don't know if I want to call them Cash Money, whatever it is. I don't know what it is, but we need to find a name for that group, because you can see Billy Donovan, when they need someone or some unit to ignite them, that he goes back to that group. Because when you look at how they are physically, long, athletic, can get after things, they can gain rebound, have all 5 guys on the glass, and really push in transition. You have some shooting with Julian Phillips, who had a nice stretch where he had a 5-point swing by himself, where he had a big-time dunk over a Memphis guy right in the lane with 2 hands, and then came right back down and knocked down a transition 3. So he's showing still. Yeah, exactly. So they feed off each other. And that's the dope thing about watching that unit play, is that you see the chemistry that they have with each other. And speaking of chemistry, Jalen Smith, what he's been able to do, not even just against the Memphis Grizzlies, but for the season, knocking down nearly 2 threes a game at a 50% clip. And this is a guy that one of the reasons why he was brought into this Bulls organization is because he's one of the more efficient shooting big men that we have in the NBA, and really thrive with the Pacers. And so that's one of the reasons why the Bulls brought him in, but also with his athleticism and what he can do inside of protecting the rim. And we saw that against the Grizzlies. And so you have defensive stops where shots are being challenged, where rebounds are being collected off of missed shots from the Grizzlies, and you're pushing in transition, you're attacking, just putting all of the pressure on Memphis. And that group alone, again, to my point, will be a group that I'm sure Billy Donovan and his coaching staff will look towards if they need to get themselves either out of a funk or continue on with a route against a specific team or certain team. So I really love what we saw from that bench unit, and especially with them putting up 37 points as a whole, as a bench unit. And we got to give some love. You gave some love to Josh Giddey, what he was able to do, near triple-double, 12 points, 13 rebounds, 8 assists. Had a couple of had a steal and a block as well. So he finished with plus 11 for those that are plus minus people out there. But then we got to give some love to Ayo Dosunmu, Chicago's own, 10 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists, but also the hustle plays. Yep. The hustle plays, Drew, especially the final play defensively for the Bulls when the shot was missed by Desmond Bane, is going out of bounds, and Ayo Dosunmu is there to deflect the ball off of Aldama and really have the game be finished. Clock went to zeros, Bulls win. So it's those type of plays where those starters and even just guys on that team see, and it just gives them a different just confidence and inflation.
You did there.
I did it a little bit because I got the old school Chicago font for those people that are watching on YouTube right now. So we got to get a picture of this to our producer Edgar so we can send this out when people want to see what I'm talking about. But it's an old school Chicago font and script from the old school jerseys. And remember those iconic jerseys when Michael Jordan was with the Bulls doing his thing in the 80s. So you have a team that realizes what they can be. And we've seen a couple of examples of it. And we've gotten a couple of examples because they've only played 4 games. But when they get after it, they can really cause some havoc, Drew.
They can, and that's what they have to do, though, because they don't have the type of defense that's going to be locking people down. Like, they're not going to win a lot of games because of their defense, but maybe they can win some games if, like we spoke to earlier, just staying active defensively, right. Active hands, communicating with each other. It's funny because last season, Alex Caruso was asked about how quiet this team is and the communication, and he spoke to how, this had been one of the more quieter teams that he had been a part of. We know that he was a part of a championship team in Los Angeles. So it's funny that kind of is coming back into play now, and how important it is for those guys, especially on the backside of that defense where guys are trying to protect the front line and being the guy in the back row and the rotating guys and the help defenders. Like, that's going to be so important for this team. They have to be in tune with each other. It started out this game tonight looking like they had never played with each other before. We were thinking we're getting signs of first game of the season in New Orleans. That was the vibe we were getting early on with this team. And for me watching that, I'm like, okay, this could turn out really bad. But I really want to know from players, and we'll get to that conversation on Wednesday night because the Bulls will be back at the United Center
against another one of those teams that's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, the Orlando Magic, who balled out against the Indiana Pacers. Paolo Banchero put up the first 50-point performance of the NBA season against the Indiana Pacers, had 37 in the first half. So the work will be cut out for the Bulls. But the question that we will ask, and that I will ask, I know, for this team is, what was said during halftime from the coaches, from the players? What were those conversations, if they can give me some insight into that? Because something shifted with this team in that third quarter. And you can say this about a lot of teams, Drew, no matter what sport it is, when you have a halftime, but especially basketball, there's something that happens for specific teams, whether they're up or down, where one team just finds or has some kind of motivator to get themselves going. And that was the Bulls in Memphis. That third quarter, they really shifted things, especially that unit that we discussed of Dosunmu, Williams, Smith, Terry, and Phillips. They really got themselves going. So I want to know what it was to really get this game turned around in Memphis. But it was a great performance from this group. And speaking of great performance, we talk about giving love, man. Zach LaVine, 30 points, max guy. I'm fully healthy. Y'all know who I am, to steal a line from KD. The great Kevin Durant. Yeah. But it was the ability to see Zach in certain situations where he was more catch and shoot Zach. And this is a conversation that I had with Casey Johnson, and he even talked to Zach about this post-game after the loss to the Oklahoma City Thunder, that Casey believes that Zach is better served off the ball on catch and shoots. And that's what we saw in Memphis, more of Zach catching, shooting, or catching the ball on the run, where he's not over dribbling or having the ball in his possession where the defense can load up on him. And I think the Bulls are better served with him in that position.
Yeah, no doubt. I agree. We know Zach to be one of the best tough shot makers in the league, one of the best isolation scorers in the last few seasons, last season notwithstanding due to injury. So there's going to be times where, Zach's an ultra confident dude. So he's going to have those moments where he's going to take a fadeaway jumper with two defenders in his face, when he might have a teammate above the break open for a three. Like that's part of his DNA.
Right.
But you just hope that, with Josh Giddey in the fold now, Lonzo Ball coming back, Ayo Dosunmu, Kobe White, now that he has different ball handlers around him, he can play off the ball more. They can kind of get him moving off of screens. I think that would unlock so much with him, where he's not having to just kind of stand still and create his own advantage, take advantage of penetration, guys kind of drawing and kicking out to him. That's going to serve him well, especially, and I hate to bring this up off a win, but especially in terms of teams who might be looking his way as we get close to the trade deadline. Like, chances are he's going to be going to a team that's already going to have an established star or two. Right. And he's not going to be in those situations where they're going to ask him to be the number one guy out there creating for his teammates. So, man, if Zach can stay a little closer to this role on this team right now, where he's playing off of guys and kind of letting guys set him up, it's going to be better for him and the team, I think, moving forward.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Zach was also from the three-point line, 5 of 12 from three, and his running mate Kobe White on that other wing had himself a resurgence, right? Because he had those 7 threes against the Milwaukee Bucks. And actually, talking about the up and down, like Kobe went 0 for 5 against the Pelicans to start the season, turned around in Milwaukee, knocked down 7 threes, then went back to a Kobe that we don't want to see, and a guy that went 0 from 3, went 0 for 9 against the Oklahoma City Thunder. But tonight's version of Kobe White, the Monday version in Memphis, 5 of 10 for 20 points. Look, Drew, you know this, man. And for people listening or watching right now, if you were raised a certain way and you're cut from a certain cloth, where if your mother or your father really wanted to get your attention and let you know that they were serious, that they would call your full government name. I'm talking about first, middle, and last name. So you even see me tweet this out sometimes. I've done it with Zach LaVine a number of times with the Bulls players. When dudes are just a bucket and on a heater, I'm giving out the full government name. So tonight I gave out the Zachary Thomas LaVine name because he was a bucket. When you go back to Friday night against the Milwaukee Bucks, I threw out the Alec Jacoby White. I'm sorry, Kobe. I know you don't want people to know your full government, but it's out there, man, for the masses. But I let people know that when I give out the full government name, I'm being serious and that y'all are on your job. So this is something where you see these two guys working in tandem. And that was evident Friday night against the Bucks, but also again against the Memphis Grizzlies in Memphis, where they're knocking down their shots, and they went 10 of 22 combined. Kobe 5 of 10, Zach 5 of 12, and it just makes it so difficult to defend that group when they have that outside shooting working. But then let's bring in this name to the conversation, who has been a double-double machine since he's been in Chicago, and that's Nikola Vucevic, a guy that was averaging 20 and 11 heading into this game. He didn't get the double-double tonight, but still he had 22 points and 7 rebounds and was 4 of 8 from 3, Drew, 50%. So he stays true to his average of what he's been averaging percentage-wise from the three-point arc. And then this is what I love to see. In certain situations, especially with a Memphis Grizzlies team that with Jaren Jackson Jr., he has to be pulled out and away from the rim, you have an advantage with Nikola Vucevic inside the lane. Vooch had 19 shot attempts, went 9 of 19 from the field. So he had his opportunities, whether in transition as that trail big or just reversal. And we've seen the guys like Zach LaVine and Kobe White looking for Vooch on the perimeter, but then also Vooch getting inside with a mismatch with young Scottie Pippen Jr. trying to play the backside of a defense, and he didn't stand a chance, and Vooch was able to take advantage of him, man. So how big has Vooch been for this team? And really, it feels like maybe we've seen the conversations, the film, the practice sessions where that desire or that coaching strategy is, hey, we got to get Vooch involved, get him the basketball.
I don't think we can name another Bull who's been as consistent offensively as Vooch has been to start this season. And to see that three-point shot come back has been such a breath of fresh air. I know for him it has to feel good coming off a season in which he shot, I think, in the mid to low 20s from deep. He swears he hasn't done anything different. He says that he's just kind of staying with his shot more, maybe not feeling like he has to rush it or chasing down the rebound. You know, they teach you when you shoot that tray ball, you leave that hand up.
Dip it down, dip the hand in the cookie jar, right? Exactly. Or make the swan neck. You know, make the swan neck.
Exactly. I don't know if that was more of a point of emphasis for him this summer coming into this season. I don't know if maybe it was the Olympics, him getting the run out there and having played more competitive basketball coming into this season, but. He's looking good, man. He's looking really good, and it's changing kind of the dynamic of this team. Like between him and Jalen Smith, it's like we got a pair of 7-foot splash brothers out there.
Hey, you know what? It is what it is. Both shooting 50% from the field from 3. So I'm with you, man. Anything positive with these guys knocking down shots is great. So that's the small 4-game sample size of this Bulls team. We will have bigger sample sizes with this group in terms of just the amount of games, who's stepping up, what things they need to work on. But I'm just riding this high, honestly, Drew, of what we saw from this Bulls team, and more so from the bench guys. And I think that was a great confidence booster for that unit and for that particular unit that was out there on the court, to just have Billy Donovan knowing that he can have a unit that he can go to if you need more defensive energy or hustle, whatever it is, then he can go to that unit and get it done. But we know the NBA, Drew, it doesn't get easier because as I hinted towards this matchup coming back to the UC for the second home game of the season, you got the Orlando Magic. Paolo Banchero, you got a guy in Jalen Suggs that had himself a ball game against the Indiana Pacers Monday night. This team is young, they're hungry, they're athletic, and they want to get after you. And it'll be another challenge for this Bulls group.
It will. We've seen this Bulls group, particularly against Orlando, kind of struggle. Orlando likes to talk a lot. They're very scrappy. I think they try to get in the Bulls' head. I don't know if it's like a Wendell Carter, Nikola Vucevic thing. Like it's like 2 gangs going at each other. Like we got your guy, you got our guy now. But like they really get after it against this Bulls team. I don't think the Bulls have played particularly well against them in like their most recent matchup. So, you know, they're going to have to be physical, and they're going to have to expect Orlando to bring the fight to them too. So that'll be something to keep an eye on come Wednesday for sure.
All right, there it is. So the Bulls have 5 more road games to go in this next 10-game stretch. Again, I don't know what the NBA has against the Chicago Bulls, but y'all set them up for hell. But it's all good though, Drew, because again, right now, 2-2, 5th in the East, Let's just stop the season right now. Bulls in the playoffs, top 6 team in the East. There we go. But it's a lot more it's a lot more basketball to be played. But again, we saw some great signs from this team in their wins, especially this most recent game against the Memphis Grizzlies and getting that dub. But go ahead, Drew. I know you're going to say something before we wrap up.
No, I was gonna make a joke, man. I was gonna make a joke. I don't know if like Adam Silver, has got some ulterior motives, maybe in that same vein of Patrick Ewing to the Knicks type vibes. But I don't know, the way the schedules open up, you never know.
Yeah, man. Come on. We got to get the Bulls some grace on this thing, man. NBA, y'all got to do better with this scheduling with them, man. But you know what? It is what it is. The Bulls are just going to take the opponents as they come, and the next opponent will be the Orlando Magic Wednesday night at the UC. Let's see if the Bulls can get over 500 for the first time this season. Big opportunity against a very good team in Orlando, who is 3-1 so far. And again, Paolo Banchero coming off a 50-point performance. His first 50-point, I believe, game of his career, if not of his career, but definitely the first 50-point performance we've seen so far in the NBA this season. So it'll be interesting. Me and Drew will be in the building at the UC covering that game and talking to the players and the team. And we'll see if the Bulls can try and not resemble the team that we saw Saturday against the Oklahoma City Thunder. But if they can bring the energy like we saw in Memphis and the production and the shooting, because there was a franchise record, 25 threes that the Bulls made against Memphis, then they'll be walking out of the United Center with a nice dub and then heading to Brooklyn on Friday to try and get another win.
They scored 75 points from beyond the arc. 75 points. Hey, 2 years, 3 years ago, would you have pictured that? Would you have imagined that?
Not at all. And if somebody told me that would have happened, then I was like, no, go home because you're drunk. This is not it. But this is a team that believes in pushing the pace, number one in the NBA in pace, but then also shooting threes. Their three-point attempts are some of the top of the NBA percentage. They have to get better in that. Not too good there. But tonight we'll boost those numbers. From three. But, man, 70-plus from the arc. It's great work from this Bulls team. Again, a franchise record, 25 threes against the Memphis Grizzlies. Hopefully that shooting and that energy and that hustle and that urgency travels back home to Chicago against the Orlando Magic. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the By the Horns podcast presented by Toyota. And always know that Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. So find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. For my man, Drew Stevens, I'm Cam Smith. Thanks for tapping in with us. We'll see you soon.